Well, Donald Trump gave his world-famous economic speech yesterday, where I think we can officially declare the Trump renegade, outsider, not conventional Republican, stupid Reaganomics wisdom guy dead. And he has been reincarnated as Donald Trump, who is Paul Ryan in drag. With the exception of his reference to the so-called free trade deals, pretty much everything Donald Trump said yesterday was standard generic rhetoric, Republican rhetoric. You know, we need to cut taxes on the rich and on the billionaires. We need to decrease regulations so that polluting industries like, you know, Coke Industries refineries and Coke Industries paper mills can dump more poison into the air and be more profitable. We need to cut regulation. We need to, well, actually, it's real interesting. One of his senior advisors, a guy by the name of Peter Navarro, gave an interview to BBC. And BBC played it on their podcast overnight, which I listened. It's how I get to sleep every night. I listen to BBC. For some reason, British accents put me to sleep, at least when I'm tired. And so I listened to this at 11 o'clock. I listened to it at 1:30. I listened to it at 4:30. Every time I wake up in the middle of the night, I turn BBC on. It puts me back to sleep. I've listened to this repeatedly. And I just wanted to share it with you. Just some little clips out of this. This is Peter Navarro being interviewed on the BBC yesterday, one of Trump's senior advisors. And he starts out by basically regurgitating the Stephen Moore, Ronald Reagan, Reaganomics line, right? Well, here it is. And I'll riff on this as we go.
If I may, I think it might be good to start at kind of what the mission of the tax and trade policies are, what the vision is. And what Mr. Trump wants to do with his economic plan is double our GDP growth rate, get it back to historic norms, which we haven't hit for about 15 years.
Actually, we haven't. If we're talking a growth rate right now, which is around 1.9%, doubling it would be more than 3%. We had average 3% GDP growth for the entire decade of the 40s, for the entire decade of the 50s, for the entire decade of the 60s, for the entire decade of the 70s. We haven't had a full decade of annual 3% GDP growth since Reagan became president and put into place Reaganomics. So, you know, he starts out with this fantasy saying we're going to, you know, everything that we're saying, in other words, we can have our tax cuts because the GDP is going to grow. The economy is going to grow so much that more people are going to be making more money. They're going to be paying more taxes, and so tax revenues are going to go up. Where have you heard this before? Well, if you're old enough to remember 1980, you heard it coming right out of the mouths of Ronald Reagan and his financial advisors, people like Stephen Moore. And for all I know, Peter Navarro. And it's a lie. I mean, this is what Sam Brownback tried to do in Kansas. He said, you know, we're going to cut taxes on the rich. We're going to cut regulations, and the magic of the market is going to double our GDP. In fact, he bragged about it. He said, we're going to make Kansas an experiment. And it's an experiment that has turned into a disaster. Kansas is collapsing. Kansas is in crisis. Kansas can't pay their budget. Kansas's bond ratings have been downgraded twice. Kansas is having to lay off public employees. Kansas is having to in fact lay off or defund teachers. In fact, Kansas is even killing people. You know, Governor Brownback, he cut regulations and cut the force, the size of the group that oversees. It's called the Kansas Department of Labor, that oversees, for example, amusement parks. He fired a bunch of them because who needs stinking government, particularly the regulatory part. And so they had never even bothered to get around to visiting this water park in Kansas. It's called the Schlitterbahn, a nice German word. I'm not sure exactly what Schlitter means. Bahn is train. It's a Kansas City water amusement park. And they've got a water slide, Virtuk, Nice German name. Tallest water slide on Earth. They did their tests at night so that nobody could watch them because bags of cement went flying out and things. They ended up having to cut it down in size, and but it never got inspected, or it hasn't recently been inspected. Kansas City police issued a statement late Monday afternoon saying Caleb suffered a fatal neck injury around 2:30 in the afternoon. Who's Caleb? Caleb Schwan, the son of an Olathe, Kansas Republican House member, died in this water park. The Kansas Department of Labor, this is an article from crooksandliars.com by Left of Center. The Kansas Department of Labor also regulates amusement park rides. In fact, state law allows state officials to conduct spot safety inspections, but the number of state employees in that department has been slashed by a third in recent years. The Schlitterbahn employee told Fox 4 she never saw a single state inspection in the multiple years she has worked there. So, yeah, I mean, this is standard Republican stuff, and it kills people. So his first premise, GDP is going to double, is wrong. It's a lie. It's never succeeded. Every time Reaganomics has been tried, what does it do? It cuts GDP. From there, he continues.
And in that way, generate millions of new jobs, trillions of dollars of tax revenues, and be able to finance the infrastructure our government needs.
Right. We heard this from Reagan once again and from his advisors, and it's BS. It's just complete BS. But he continues.
If I may.
Oops. Sorry. He continues from here.
It was energy, regulation, taxes to sustain a vibrant economy. So that's the Trump mission. Now, what Mr. Trump did today was hit 4 points of that policy compass, not 3. It was energy, regulation, taxes, and tariffs, and they all work together. So, for example,
now this is really interesting. Energy, regulation, taxes, and tariffs. Energy, Trump's new energy policy is pump as much oil and fossil fuels as you can because global warming is a hoax. And, oh, yeah, sure, that renewable stuff, we can do a little bit of that. Taxes, we're going to cut taxes radically. We're going to go from 5 or 7 tax brackets down to 3. We're going to go from a top tax rate of almost 39% down to 33%. The billionaires are going to get a huge tax break. We are going to offer a tax break to people with children, but it's a tax. It's not a tax credit. It's a tax deduction. So you have to be part of that, basically upper third of Americans who itemize your deductions, or it's useless to you. On regulations, we're going to deregulate. And on trade, trade has to do with tariffs. So this is where it gets interesting, is when he gets into exactly what he plans to do with regard to tariffs. And tariffs, this is at 5:30 in here. And here is his comment on tariffs. Basically admitting that he's lying about tariffs.
It's fair. It's a positive-sum game, and that's where Mr. Trump wants to go. He talks about tariffs, but tariffs aren't the end game, my friend. It's a strategy to get China to stop its currency manipulation. Look,
see, in other words, we're not actually going to go back to a protectionist trade policy under Trump. We're not going to go back to the way it was before Reagan. We're not going to go back to the way it was with George Washington or Andrew Jackson or Abraham Lincoln or Teddy Roosevelt or Franklin Roosevelt or John Kennedy. We're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to threaten to do that in order to get China to normalize their currency, which is relatively normalized. I mean, it's working fine domestically. There's not a great deal of international harassment about currency dumping or, currency manipulation. Yeah, they're messing with it, but that's nothing compared to a 20-30% tariff. In other words, Trump has been lying to us again, and now he has reincarnated himself as Paul Ryan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
He's Paul Ryan, I say in drag, because he's dressed up as somebody who isn't Paul Ryan. He's dressed up as somebody who is an anti-trader or an anti-free trader, but he's not. There was one interesting moment during this BBC interview with Peter Navarro, where the BBC guy kind of pushed back and said, oh, wait a minute, you're talking about, protectionist trade. I mean, conventional wisdom has it that that's going to cost us millions of jobs. You're going to have to pay $40 for a pair of socks, whatever. Peter Navarro actually had a pretty good answer for that. Although, once again, it shows that Trump is got his BS down, but he doesn't have his policy down. And this is particularly dangerous because this is exactly what Reagan did. Here's the interaction.
Okay.
Has filed complaint after complaint.
I'm sorry. It's
Consensus is that the trade barriers he's talking about will reduce wages.
Yeah, but look at what the consensus has gotten us, my friend. The consensus going back to the 90s, going back to NAFTA, going back to China into the World Trade Organization. All the people who live in Great Britain, so many of them have been disadvantaged, haven't seen any wage gains, seen their jobs gone, seen their factories gone. Why is that happening? It's because this conventional wisdom that there's always gains from trade and they're distributed equally is a relic of the past. As soon as China manipulates and fixes its currency, all bets are off on the...
See, there he goes. He's like, okay, your conventional wisdom sucks. And then he goes to China manipulating their currency. Why? Because they don't want to go Ross, they don't want to go full Ross Perot. Trump will say it. Trump did say it yesterday. But then his advisors come along behind him, like the guy with the elephant, with the little scoop and the broom, picking it up and cleaning it off and moving it out of view and answering in a way that I guess the fact checkers can say, well, yeah, I guess this was answered or something. I don't know. But Trump is running a scam. The people who are actually saying blow up the trade deals are the actual progressives, the House Progressive Caucus. There are people like Bernie Sanders. There are people like, Jan Schakowsky. There are people like Elizabeth Warren. There are people like Sherrod Brown. There are people like Mark Pocan. There are people like Keith Ellison. There are people like Raul Grijalva, Barbara Lee. They're saying blow up these trade deals. These trade deals, we need to go back to a trade policy that purely and simply defends American workers. And Trump is saying that, but he's lying through his teeth. Meanwhile, our job is to, in my opinion, is to get more Democrats to talk like that. And there's a lot of Democrats talking like that. I mean, let's not forget, every single trade deal except PNTR with China, every single one of these trade deals was passed with a majority support of Republicans. And that's why this guy, even though Trump goes out and does his whole populist speech, the Republicans in the background, the Paul Ryans in the background are going, yeah, wink, wink, nod, nod. We understand. This is just, you're just going to threaten this. Yeah. As, President Obama actually imposed tariffs on China over steel and rubber during his presidency. He actually imposed tariffs. And the Chinese backed down from currency manipulation or from dumping products, selling products below market because of those tariffs. I mean, it's a small effort. It's just a very small effort in a very large and rigged game. But this is what's going on, and it's really important that people, and the reason I want to focus so much on this is I am of the belief, and I defy you to prove me wrong, or I encourage you to prove me wrong. If I was wrong on this, I would just be astounded. I am of the belief that the majority, the absolute majority, more than 50%, and frankly, I think it's more than 80%, of white working people who support Donald Trump, and for that matter, the very few working class minority people who support Donald Trump, and it's, around 1% to 3% in the African-American community, around 6% in the Latino community, that they are supporting Donald Trump because of his trade policies, or because of what they think is his trade policy, because he wants to bring jobs home. Well, you want to bring jobs home, you have to go back to Alexander Hamilton. You have to do what the Chinese are doing right now. You have to do what the Germans are doing right now. You have to do what the South Koreans are doing right now. You have to do what the Taiwanese are doing right now. You have to do what the South Koreans or the Japanese are doing right now. You have to do what the French are doing right now. You have to do what the Scandinavians are doing right now. You have to figure out a way to make your exports less expensive and your imports more expensive. It's just that simple. Now, the clumsiest way to do this is to manage the value of your currency. As your currency goes up, And we're seeing this right now. We have a very strong dollar. So the cost of our exports are high. The cost of imports are cheap, which, arguably hurts American workers. China, on the other hand, has a very weak yuan, their currency, the renminbi. And as a result of that, their imports are expensive and their exports are cheap, which helps an export-driven country. But this is just a couple of percentage points, 2, 3, 4 points. The big difference is the fact that Chinese labor is cheaper. Chinese environmental regulations, by and large, don't exist. Chinese, poison regulations don't exist. Chinese workers are disposable. They don't have unions. They don't have, health and safety. They don't have vacations. They don't have paid sick day. It's like, this is why employers are going to China. And if we simply put a tariff or used a VAT tax, as Peter Navarro mentioned, although the guy from BBC interrupted him, I thought it was very interesting. Here's where he goes off on VAT taxes.
Is that the U.S. relies on an income tax rate, whereas much of the rest of the world has VAT taxes. Under the unequal treatment in the World Trade Organization, Mexico can export cars. Go ahead.
Forgive me. Time is pressing.
At that point, the BBC guy goes, I don't want to hear about VAT taxes. Nobody even knows what VAT taxes are. We're talking to a stupid American audience. Don't you understand? Well, I think people who watch this program know what VAT taxes are, and they know that Peter Navarro is right about that. But again, Donald Trump is not proposing VAT taxes. It's a giant bait and switch. Tell your Republican friends.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And in the meantime, let's start lobbying Democrats to be a little more progressive and go back to a trade policy that worked for the United States for over 200 years.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.